Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, Prince Automation Destination. This is Prince. I hope you are doing well. So today we are going to talk about how we can utilize record class in TestNG. But before that, let us try to understand what is record. So record is a special type of class introduced in JDK 17, and the purpose of this particular class is to allow users to store immutable data, meaning once the data is stored and if we don't need to modify that, in that case we can go for record. So let us try to understand the same. So we are going to talk about how we can utilize record in TestNG. But before that, let us try to understand what is record. So as we mentioned that this is a special type of class to store immutable data with less ceremonies. What does this less ceremonies means? Meaning this is the syntax of record. Record employs string first name, string last name, and that's it. Right? Rest of the things will be taken care by compiler internally. Meaning a parameterized constructor will be created internally, and accessor methods like the getter methods of first name and last name will also be created, but setters won't be created because these fields are final in record. As record is intended to serve as a data carrier, so fields are final. So these are known as fields, right? So wherever we have a requirement that we are using POJOs and we want to just store the static data, we don't want to modify that. In that case, we can go for record, right? So it is the boilerplate code, right? Now talking about how we can utilize it into TestNG, right? So in TestNG, for example, when we work with TestNG, we create a test case using @test annotation on a particular method. So suppose we have created a login method, right? And login test case, for example, and we want to test login functionality with different credentials like valid username, valid password, valid username, invalid password, invalid username, and valid password. So how we can achieve it? So what we can do is we can use the concept of data provider. Through data provider, we can feed all type of inputs, like all type of credentials, and that can be fed into test case, and test case then run with all these data, right, one by one, right? So let us jump onto the practical demonstration and try to understand. Okay. So this is a sample project, a 𝑚𝒚 based project where I'm using Selenium dependency, I'm using TestNG dependency, and this is a sample class, right? Here I'm having a before method which will execute before every @test method. So I'm having one test case. I'll come to this. Then I'm having @after method which will execute after this particular test method, right? So what this particular test case is all about? This test case is about launching a source demo application, logging into the application with username and password, and this username password is being served from the data provider, right? So if you will notice, this is the data provider that I'm using. Standard user, secret source, problem user again, right? So I can copy this, right? So this is user and this is password. This is logged out user and this is password, right? So password is going to be common, right? And the username is changing, meaning whatever you want to configure, we can configure it, right? Now what will happen is when we run this particular test case, it will run for this particular data set, then it will run for this particular data set, and then it will run for this particular data set. In case we want to run it in parallel, we can simply make it as true. In case you want to understand more on how to run a particular test case with multiple data set in parallel, I have already covered a video which I'll be sharing in 𝑖𝒏, right? Now we have discussed that how our test case can be fed with data provider, right? But before that, let us try to understand how we are initializing the driver, right? Because initializing of driver is also important. So if you will notice, we are passing a cron driver and we have created a class driver manager. Let me go inside this driver manager.get instance. So here we are following the singleton design pattern. And if you will notice, this is a private constructor, which indicates that this is a singleton design pattern being followed, and then we have a get instance method to return the instance of this particular class, and then we have written one set driver method to set the specific driver. For example, in this case we are going to set proc, and then we have like get driver to get this particular driver that we have set. And if you will notice, we are using the concept of thread local, right? So this is for the purpose of thread safety, and it helps in the case of parallel execution. So in case you want to understand more on this, like how to implement a thread safe WebDriver, you can check out my video. I'll be sharing the link of same, right? But the purpose of this particular thing is, I'll come back to this particular class. This is to just initialize the driver per cron. Here we are launching it, right? So once we set it up, then we are launching it, and at last in after method, we are simply quitting it, right? So now we understood this particular test case, right? Here, what we are using is, we are using hard-coded credentials, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to execute it, right? Okay, so you will notice that it will execute 3 test cases. So you see, first test case is triggered, right? So first test case will execute with one data set, right, which will be logged in because this is valid data. It would be quitted. Then the control will go to the second test case, and here it will go to the problem user, and this time it will use problem user, right? Okay, but it will have problems internally, right? Okay, so it will also be quitted. Now it will go for the logged out user, which won't allow you to log in, right? So here we will get some error, right? Because we are using the logged out user. Okay, so meaning all 3 test cases are executed, meaning one test case with 3 different data set is executed, right? Now we are going to change it or replace it with like record. So for that purpose, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a record. Let us give it name user. Okay, and I'm simply going to right click on Java class, and here we will choose record. Okay, so you see record got created. So what we will do is we will simply use username, comma, string, password. Okay, so we don't need to do anything. So record is created, right? So now we have created a user record. Next thing is we are going to change this particular section with user record specific, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to enclose this into user object, right? So new user, right? And we will simply enclose this, right? Similarly, I'll copy this particular section, new user, right? And new user, right? Here also I'll copy, and let me add this particular base, right? So suppose instead of record, if we would have created class, we will have to create the constructor, parameterized constructor to assign this username and password. But as we have created record, this is being taken care internally, right? So we are not getting any error, right? Now what next thing is we will have to use or replace this particular username and password which we were using previously with user record, right? Because previously it was like hard-coded string value for username and password. That's why we were using string username and string password, right? Now what we are going to do is user, right? And here also we were reading from here, right? Because we were having username and password in the form of string, but we have now in the form of this particular record. So user dot username. So you'll see that I'm getting this particular username automatically. We haven't created this particular method. This is happening because of record internally, right? Similarly, user dot password, right? So this is done. Okay. Now what I'm going to do, I'm simply going to turn this into true so that I can run all 3 test cases in parallel, right? To quickly execute this particular thing, right? So now what I'm going to do, I'm simply going to run it and let us see how it will behave. It should work fine as like it was previously working, right? So you see 3 test cases are running in parallel with 3 different data set, right? So they will run fine because I'm using thread safety concept. As I mentioned earlier, I'm using thread local concept for the thread safety of driver. So one instance got launched, and similarly you will start seeing the second one as well, right? And then the third one. So this is the first instance, right? I'm using the concept of synchronized as well. That's why you may see some delay so that all the threads don't enter at the same time, right? So second thread also running in parallel. Now the third instance will also come into picture, right? So all 3 will be running in parallel, right? So you see all 3 test cases got executed. So this is how we can replace the hard-coded username and password with this user object, right? So this is what I have covered for the hard-coded value. In the next lecture, what we'll be doing is we'll be moving this particular username and password into JSON string or JSON file, and then we'll be converting this JSON into user object with the help of deserialization concept using object mapper. And then you will understand more on like how we can utilize record with JSON along with deserialization. So this is what I wanted to cover, guys, as part of current discussion. Thank you for watching. I would request you to please like, share and subscribe. Thank you once again.